Okay. Okay. Good morning. I think we probably can start. Is it 11 yet? Ooh, a couple minutes. It's like church will give the latecomers a chance to. Hello. Hi. I thought we might be going to miss you today. Hi, Tony. Somebody get your seat? No, they got. I got my Southern Command shirt on for you today. Okay, good. Thank you. Yes. This is probably the luxury version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know what it costs, but I'm sure it's expensive.
I'm sure it is too.
Yeah. If you could see the cars and everything, they're very. Okay, people. I think we should probably get started. Before I start, I just had a couple things I wanted to cover. First of all, I have a couple extra of these books. They're the previous edition, the 9th edition. They're no different than the current one. If anybody wants to borrow one, you can borrow one. The other thing is, and I meant to bring this up last time, somebody asked, I think, might have been you, about somebody we got talking about imposters anyway, people who have come along and claim to be descendants or people who basically made it through the massacre. Well, this is a book that came out in 1998, very convenient time because remember, 91 is when the remains were found, 98 is when they were interred. But remember, there were two people missing, Alexei and Maria. Not Anastasia, she was never missing. Well, she was for a long time, but not after 1991. Maria and Alexei were missing. So this book came out in 98. So it's a perfect time, because he wasn't found until 2007. And it's a very compelling book, and it says on the back here somewhere, they've identified somebody who they basically have conclusively proved by documentation, etc., was in fact Tsar Nicholas's son, Alexei. And it's very interesting. I haven't read the book from cover to cover because I know it's actually not true, but if you read it and start really looking at it, it looks pretty convincing. And the people that have done this are not, they're not people that write for second string publications and stuff. They're responsible people. So when the church says now, in the face of all of the evidence, they're looking at historical documents, I suspect it's stuff like this. Again, if anybody wants to borrow this and look at it, as long as I get it back, why, you're welcome to take it. I have not read it. But I can see from skimming through it, it has all the details that we talked about last week of what happened to the bodies, et cetera, et cetera. The premise here is that somehow he escaped. He was alive when they took the bodies out, and he got away, so to speak, into the woods, and was rescued and brought up by a family. And in fact, this person who they claim is Alexei has since died, so he's not alive anymore. The next thing is, you caught me on something last week. You're Ann, right?
Right.
With an E, right?
Right.
My wife's same.
Okay.
Yeah. I was showing you a picture of a church, and you said, well, I thought you said Stalin tore down all the churches. And I did say that. And I got me thinking, I'm saying that, and I know that it's sort of true, but I didn't really know well, how many exactly did he tear down, and how true is this statement? So I searched around, and what I found out is at the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, there were about 50 to 55,000 churches in Russia, and about 1,000 monasteries. At the time of Perestroika, which is the late 80s, early 90s, there were 8,000. So it had gone from 54,000 down to 8,000. And 15 monasteries instead of 1,000. So there are no clergy coming. And whatever else they did with monasteries. What they do with the monasteries, they converted some of them into gulag prisons. They converted some of them into facilities for the use of the government. So interestingly, now they're already back up to 34,000 churches, just since 1990. So they're building churches like mad over there, like we said.
I saw one in Irkutsk where they were using it as a grain storage. It was all broken down and everything, but they were using it as a grain storage.
They used to, exactly. The handheld mic is not here. I don't know where it is. Yeah, would you please? Yeah, thanks, hon. That's the other Ann. There may be another Ann in here. So it is a great name. Another Ann with an E?
Well, if, an historical comparison would be Henry VIII taking over the properties of the church.
Exactly.
And it was obviously monetary as well as political.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to show you something today, a picture to show you just kind of how far this went. So thanks for challenging me. It got me, curious about what I'm saying and whether what I'm saying is in fact accurate or not. Oh, before I get rid of that, maybe I will just review quickly what we're going to do here today, or what I hope to do here today. Remember last time we were on our way to Krasnoyarsk. Novosibirsk, I did not stop in Novosibirsk. Novosibirsk is the biggest city in Siberia. It's the third largest city in all of Russia. It's a relatively new city. Novosibirsk means New Siberia. It really grew up around the railroad. We're going to talk a little bit about rivers and bridges today. And this is the Ob River that runs through here, and it's one of the three very large rivers that you have to deal with. One is the Ob, one is the Yenisei, and the other is the Lena over here. They're the three big rivers. They all run north, and they all presented challenges as far as getting across them for bridges. So anyway, we're going to go to Krasnoyarsk, then we're going to go to Irkutsk. We're going to spend a fair amount of time in Irkutsk. Irkutsk is probably the most visited city on the train. And then we're going to go to Ulun-Ude, and we'll get, I think, half done of what I wanted to get done in Ulun-Ude, if we can get everything done I want to do today. I had hoped originally today to finish everything to get to Vladivostok, but I really can't do that and do justice to what we need to see, and we'll be okay. We have plenty of time, so I've had to sort of adjust my thinking here a little bit. Let me see here. Oh, bear just a second. Okay, let's go here and start here. So we're on our way to Krasnoyarsk. Oh, before we do that, I want to do something else.
It went down.
I know. I thought since we're traveling in Russia, we might want to learn a couple Russian words. And I don't know if you can see this, that's the problem. And two good words are hello, hi, and bye, so long. Hi, there's a couple different ways to say hi in Russia. Russian. One is called, it's a mouthful. Thank you very much. Yeah.
See how it's coded.
Okay, good. If you're, it's a formal hello. If you don't know the person, it's Здравствуйте. It's a mouthful. If you know somebody, they're friends, this is it. This is Cyrillic. It's Privyet. 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 So when we see each other, we can say Privyet. Means hi. Privyet. Privyet. This is P-R-I-V-E-T. If you're going to say bye, that's even easier. It's paka. So you say paka paka. Bye bye. So you want to try it? So it's Privyet. Paka. But what could be easier? So let me. Privyet. Paka. What's that?
No.
No, it's okay.
Pete, I have a question.
Yes.
If you would say Privyet to someone that you're just meeting, would they be insulted?
No. They would, it depends, I suppose. I think probably appreciate you attempting to speak to them, and the Russians aren't that way. They'd be probably pleased. And they'd know what you meant. The other one, Здравствуйте, it's a mouthful. And it doesn't even sound friendly, actually, when you think about it. Remember we talked about how the resistance. The Russians are great for posters. I love their posters. This is fight against religion, fight for socialism. And then the little banner up there says cultural revolution. And I mean, this was a popular theme, right, when the Bolsheviks came along. Now, Stalin had this idea that he wanted to build something that was called the Palace of the Soviets. It's sort of reminiscent of Hitler and Germania, you know, and this is what it was going to look like. And it was going to be somewhere, he wasn't sure where, somewhere in Moscow. And this Lenin, and there's our friend Lenin right at the top, same pose. And he was 100 meters high. It's a length of a football field, more actually. And this was going to be taller than the Empire State Building. It's going to be massive. So he was looking around for where can I put this. Well, there was a big church in Russia right on the Moscow River. It's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I think, yeah. I used to walk by it every day because it's been rebuilt, but this is what happened to it. In 1931, he had it dynamited to the ground. Took him a year to clear everything away, and he was going to put this horrific building there. Fortunately, the Germans came along, and he needed the steel for other things, and he never got back to it. It became a hole in the ground, which was a big swimming pool for a long time. And then in 1990, they built this church back. I used to walk by this every day. Yes?
I heard that in the swimming pool that they baptized people
Because of the holiness of the ground.
holiness of the place.
Did you hear what she just said? They baptized people in that spot because it was a holy place. You get around there. So we're arriving in Krasnoyarsk. This is I showed you this last week. This is, Krasnoyarsk is a typical terminal. It hasn't been modernized much. It's a beautiful terminal. As I said, occasionally you get lucky, and there'd be a sign that actually said in English what it meant. When I arrived in Krasnoyarsk, there was a terrible storm going on. And it was almost like, I think they called it almost like a cyclone. It did a lot of damage. By the time I got to my hotel and got in and opened the window, everything had cleared off. The sun was out and it looked beautiful. You can see everything is wet. That's the Yenisei River there in front of the hotel. This was just a thing below. This was my guide, Natasha. Natasha was her name. She was a graduate student. Her boyfriend was a graduate student. This is the Yenisei River. North of the city, I can't remember, there was an overlook, which was a very popular place to go to see the river. Wedding people, parties came here for photos, and here's the locks that they put on. This is what the Yenisei River looks like. It's the biggest river system that drains into the Arctic Ocean. We're down here at Krasnoyarsk. You can see the river, the Angara comes in here. We're going to run into the Angara. It drains out of Lake Baikal. And then the Selenga River also goes into Baikal, and it's sort of connected with this. And that's another big river that we're going to see when we're in Ulanudi. So this is a huge system. It drains a big area. And remember what I told you, because these rivers all flow north, they are frozen a good portion of the year, the mouth of the river. So the northern part of Siberia is very swampy. And it's one of the reasons it's not settled much. It's cold, but it's also not very suitable because it's so wet. Here's the first bridge that was built across. It's about 1 kilometer long, which is 6/7 of a mile, 5 spans. These were big projects, and the rivers were bottlenecks. They would build up to the river, okay? Sorry. No, it's okay. We're probably going to end up needing it. They'd build up to the rivers, and then they would stop until they could get a bridge built. These bridges were built in Russia. Some were built in the US. The sections were built like kits, and they would take them over and assemble them there. The US made a lot of money on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. We supplied a lot of the locomotives. They were built by Baldwin in Philadelphia. Baldwin was a big supplier. We provided a lot of the steel for the rails. I mean, we made a lot of money on this. This is the new bridge, was built within the last 20, 30 years. They took down the old bridge. This is double tracked now. The first one was single tracked. That was another improvement that was made. The original railroad was single tracked. And I've been looking everywhere to try to find a beginning and an ending date for the beginning of double tracking and the ending. And I can't find anything. I think it was done piecemeal along the way. And I think it was only recently finished, probably within the last 20 years is my guess. This is the bridge at Novosibirsk, about the same length. I think that's a double-track bridge, I can't be sure. But they took down the original bridge, and they've actually moved the location of it, and they saved a section, they saved a section of it. So that at least you could see what it looked like. That's not my picture, it's a stock picture. But that was a piece of the original. Well, that must be the double-track bridge on the right, because you can still see it over there today. So this was the single-track bridge. And these bridges were all built just prior to 1900. More or less, 1900 marks the first time you could ride a train all the way. I find different dates, 1900, 1901, 1902, but it's around 1900. These are our three guys again, Stalin, Lenin, and Trotsky. Three, they're the guys that made it all happen. Three really interesting people. Now's a good time to tell you, there's 4 movies or 4 videos that I suggest you look for. The first one is called The Last Tsar. I've told you about that already. That talks about everything up to the execution of the Tsar's family. It's very well done. You can see how Nicholas kind of was in over his head and how he mismanaged everything and how Rasputin got in there, how the hemophiliac son, just caused all kinds of problems. Their concealment of that. The next movie I want you to think about is called Trotsky. It's on Netflix, and it talks about Trotsky and his influence in this. Trotsky ended up heading the Red Army. When the Red Army and the White Army were fighting, he went to Lenin and said, we need a Red Army, and I'll run the Red Army. And he created it, and he was gone a lot. And that probably gave Stalin the opportunity to kind of move in a little closer. What was unexpected was Lenin died just 2 years after the revolution, the Civil War was over. 1922 was when everything was kind of settled. He came on the scene in 17, but for 5 years there was a civil war going on. After the Civil War ended, he only lived 2 years. And it's too bad because that's when Stalin kind of moved in. But this other movie is Trotsky. The third one is called The Admiral, and it's on Prime. And it's about Kolchak. Kolchak, the guy we talked about, the Admiral. Like, he was an admiral. And he was a very ineffective leader. He was a war hero, but he did a poor job of leading the White Army. They got thrown out of Omsk, and he got thrown out of Omsk in 1920. And he fled to Irkutsk. They caught him there and they executed him. So he was only in that role a short time, and he didn't do a very good job with it. But it's a great movie. And the last one we're going to maybe get to today, and I can never remember the name of this movie, The Captivating Star of Happiness. The Captivating Star of Happiness is the translation. If you Google that, you'll find it. It's a Russian movie with English subtitles. Very watchable. It's the story of the Decembrists' wives. They were royalty, and when they got caught up in this plot and got shipped to Siberia, the wives didn't have to, but they chose to go with them. They actually lived in prison with them. They ended up doing rather well for themselves there in the long haul, but they had a very tough time of it. This is way prior to the railroad, so there was no way to get there except under extreme hardship, and they were all the way over. They were all the way, the map's gone, they were all the way over east of Lakau. So those 4 movies fit very nicely with what we're doing here. So here were the, we had this map up last time, and we talked about Dostoevsky. Other people that ended up over here were Lenin, Stalin, and Trotsky, all 3 of those guys. Trotsky ended up in Irkutsk. Stalin was in many places up here. He kept escaping, and they kept sending him back. Dostoevsky, as you remember, was in a terrible situation. I mean, it was terrible. Lenin, by contrast, was in what we would call a white-collar prison today. He came to Krasnoyarsk, and he was only there 3 years in his sort of house arrest in a city nearby. He came to Krasnoyarsk. He was there a short time, paid his own way there, actually. And at this time, the train was running. And while he was there, he stayed on a boat. Well, we'll go back and start at the beginning here. This boat I just showed you, I think is called the Nikolai. It's a museum now in Krasnoyarsk. And it was a steamship that ran up and down the Yenisei River. And when Tsar Nicholas, well, he was not the Tsar then, of course. Remember, he was in Yekaterinburg. He made a trip across Siberia back to St. Petersburg. He stopped in Krasnoyarsk, and this was his cabin. They have it kind of fixed up as a memorial to him. That's his picture. He attended a lot of events as he made his way across. They would welcome him to the city. They would have a big ball, big gathering, a lot of ceremony. This was Lenin's cabin. Okay. And he shared it with two other guys. There's two bunk beds in here. And this is where he lived for his journey to the town where he went and where he spent 3 years in more or less house arrest. But he wasn't really in house arrest. He'd go out and walk around. After that, we walked back to the station. This is the exterior of the train station in Krasnoyarsk. As I said, it's a beautiful station. It's very typical of the train stations in the bigger cities. And that was Natasha. I look pretty happy there. Younger. No beard. I grew my beard on my last trip in 2018. I was going and I thought it felt like the thing to do, and I intended to shave it off, but then people said, it looks good, why don't you keep it? It's kind of an in thing now, actually.
Yeah.
You know, my barber told me like 75% of the people now have beards, and so I guess I'll keep it. So that's it for Krasnoyarsk. Yes?
I think that I recall a book called To the Finland Station or something like that about Lenin being transported by the Germans.
Correct.
Yeah, is that the correct title?
I don't know that you're correct. There's a movie. I'm not sure that's the title of it. Does anybody know?
Yeah, maybe a book.
Well, what the situation was, he was in Germany. He was not popular in Leningrad or St. Petersburg. I mean, he was a troublemaker. That's why he got sent to Siberia. And he went to Germany. I think he was in Berlin, I'm guessing, I'm not sure. And when the Germans could see that things were coming to a head in Russia, they wanted him back there because they knew if he got in power, remember the Russians and the Germans were fighting the First World War, they knew he would end Russia's support in the war against Germany. And he did as soon as he got in place. Because they just were not going to support that war against Germany, the Bolsheviks. So that's why the Germans had a keen interest in getting him back into Russia. So they did provide a train passage for him to get him back there. And there is a movie about it, but I don't know the name of it. Yeah. If you can find it, you could tell us next week. Okay?
So he came back and they got rid of the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks
Took
power.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Tsar abdicated in March or something, and a guy by the name of Kerensky came along, tried to hold things together, sort of, they became the White Russians, you know, the people that the Trotsky and the Red, you know, the Bolsheviks were fighting against. And again, the October Revolution, which occurred in November because of the calendar, which is always confusing, is when finally, November 6th in the Gregorian calendar, is finally when Lenin took over, basically. The Bolsheviks took over. But they didn't really, because there was a civil war then going on. And he did promptly withdraw their support in the war. Whoops, I have to change to go to Irkutsk. Come on, come on, come on. Oh no, I don't want to exit full screen. I want to get rid of this stuff. How do I do that? Oh, I know how to do it. Can't get rid of it. No, there's a menu that's hidden. There it is. That's what I want to do. This is a picture, we're on the train now, we're heading toward Irkutsk. And as I always was taking pictures out the windows, just, you know, and this is pretty typical. There are a lot of birch trees. I think I told you I didn't see any hardwoods until I got almost all the way to the end. I'd see birch trees, fields. Now this next picture, do you see anything in that picture that looks unusual?
Looks what?
Hmm? Looks like a cultivated field to me. I never saw a piece of farm equipment, ever, once in my trip. But it certainly looks like that field was cultivated. Something's been planted in rows there. I always found it odd that with all this land, that there wasn't more agriculture going on. And I just happened to notice this when I was going through my pictures, but I never saw a piece of farm machinery, ever. This is a power station, one of the substations that for the electrification. Now again, the Trans-Siberian, after the Bolsheviks came over, they took over the railroad, and then Kolchak and the White Army and Trotsky and his armored trains, and they fought all along this railroad, and they pretty much destroyed it. Not so much the tracks, but all the rolling stock. Locomotives, everything. So by the time the war was over in 1922, there wasn't much left. And the railroad was deteriorating. The low point was about 1926. In 1929, Stalin came up with his first of his 5-year plans, and included in that was the electrification of the Trans-Siberian Railroad. So it started in 1929. It finished in 2002. So it's went on for a long, long time. And I think that's similar with the double tracking thing. I think some of it started early, but it didn't finish, I think, until fairly late. This again is one of the villages you see, you know, they look charming, but I'm sure living there is not easy. You see all the gardens again. People grow a lot of their own food. They don't have access to Walmart and all that kind of stuff, you know, trucks rolling in full of stuff from South America and everything. And, so they depend on growing a lot of their own food. I looked out the window, and this was the first time I came across, I'm pretty far east now, this phenomena which goes on quite a bit, which is the local women, mostly women, bring food to the station and set it up on the, and as the trains roll in, they sell stuff. Just the ladies open for business. Not very friendly looking, but this lady had beverages, beer. She had up here is kvass. I got a bottle of kvass. I'm going to bring it in hopefully next time. $4, there's enough that we could all have 16 ounces, you know, I mean, it's cheap. And, but I can't bring it in the room. I can't bring it in the room because I can't have anything open beverage in here. And I'm not even sure I can serve it outside, to be honest with you, because the bistro has some kind of a lockdown on beverages and things. But anyway, we'll figure out where we can go have some if you want, if you're interested. This in here in the middle is these noodle things you get, which you put boiling water in. They're very popular on the train. And over here on the end are some pine nuts. Every car at the end, at one end, has a samovar. And it's 24/7, all the boiling water you could possibly want. So there's a constant stream of people going back and forth down this aisle to the samovar. They take their noodle things down there. You can heat them up, you know, and you eat them right out of the same container. Make coffee, tea, anything you need hot water for, there's lots of hot water. So these are electric, some. In some of the older cars, there actually is a coal furnace at the end where the attendant has to keep a coal fire going. Yes?
I read that they have coal for heating there.
Yes.
Because if the electricity goes off, they all will freeze.
Yes. Yeah. They do, and I don't know about the newer cars, but the older cars, I don't know how often they have power failures. It would be a real problem if they did. Later on, when we are driving across toward Magadan, and we were on the road highway for a long time, I said, what happens if we get stranded? Because it goes down to -40, -50. They burn the tires on their cars. You got 4 tires, and they'll make it through the night with 4 tires. So it's dangerous to be out in the cold. We don't think about it. These are pine nuts. I love these things. They're very expensive. The ones on the left are not shucked. The ones on the right are. They also look bigger. But these ladies are very skillful at putting one between their teeth and cracking it, and they get the nut out. So I figured I'd save money and buy the ones that were not unshucked. And it's impossible to get the nut out. You should see them. It's like the baseball players, you know, eating sunflower seeds and they spitting them out. And they never touched anything. They could do that with their blindfolded. This lady has an assortment of things. This is like a pizzelle, but you know, if you look in there, they're like samosas. I'll show you closer. There's some pickles there. Dried fish, always dried fish, sausage, bananas.
And they're open like that?
Pardon?
They're not covered?
No. This is a good looking, you know, spread of things here. Eggs, you're pretty good with the hard-boiled eggs. I was always suspicious of anything with meat. There's some pierogies up there.
Pelmenis,
I'm sorry?
pelmenis on the upper left-hand corner.
Yeah,
They're a stuffed pasta type of a thing.
yeah. It's not a pierogi. It's like a pierogi.
It's smaller.
How do you know so much about
I've been there 4 times.
this? See, I better watch out here. You can help me out. I think you are. Do you know what any of these other things are?
I just know the pelmenis.
Yeah. I have Polish daughter-in-laws, and so I know pierogies, but this is a really good-looking collection of stuff. These little hot dogs in the corner, I was safe eating those. Pickles. I lived on pickles and boiled potatoes. And these things on the bottom down here were kind of like a meatball-looking thing. I stayed away from stuff like that because I was always afraid I'd get sick, you know, and if I got sick, I was really that was not going to be good. I think I ended up buying some boiled potatoes and pickles from this lady.
You also ate on the train.
Yes.
It was like a treat or?
Well, could be. You know, I can get along not eating a lot if I'm traveling. I just kind of,
But
you
you
know.
had food on the train.
Yeah, I could buy these things you can heat, you know, with the hot water. I could eat one of those. I could go to the dining car. People on the train generally didn't go to the dining cars because they're saving money riding the trains. And it's not expensive, but it's an expense. And they would bring their own
So
food.
this was a farmer's market, that was more.
Kind of like, yeah. And this was pretty reasonable. And you could see some was much more appealing the way it was presented than others. Some didn't. Yes,
Was all the food under ice?
on my,
Ice, when they.
I doubt it,
showed all
I
the-
doubt it, yeah.
Just
I
out
wouldn't
there.
think so, no.
So you must have a lot of cash with you.
No, really, it wasn't that expensive. I always get cash when I'm traveling out of ATMs. And there would always be an ATM in a station because ATMs give you a good exchange rate, better than you can, and depending on what you're using, it's not that expensive to make the transaction. And you get a pretty good exchange rate that way, probably the best you're gonna get. So,
You can buy the frozen pelmeni at the European store here in Northgate.
good to know. I was there recently. Yeah, that's where I got the kvass. Yeah. I'm looking for some of the little biscuit cookies I love, because I was going to bring those too. But they don't have them. The ones they have are much more caloric. These were the local, the people, I think they're called Palat. I can't think of the Russian name. Pavladniks, I think is the Russian name. But they're like conductors. This looks like a couple. Pretty young. Some of them are older. Some of them are men, women. Some are very militant, you know, in terms of following the rules and herding you around. Others are very laid back about it. But they're all fine. I always was looking around when I was in train yards to see what was on the trains. A lot of timber and lumber. The Trans-Siberian Railroad is a very, very important part of Russian commerce today. There's a lot of freight on it. I think I read somewhere 30% of their exports travel over this train. And probably a good part of that is oil, because they're bringing oil from the east across. This is, we're now in Irkutsk. This is Central Market. And I just wanted to show you what, it was in the morning when I got there, and my driver said, well, let's stop at the market. I wanted to get some coffee. I wanted to get something, pastry or something. So we stopped in this market, and I had my selection of things here. I got some coffee. Then we walked around. The Russians love baked goods, and they have good baked goods. My Russian teacher claims that she can't really get any good baked goods here. It has to come from Russia. All their kielbasa and everything. Milk. This is regular milk. Later on, when we're up in Yakutsk, the drink of choice there is mare's milk. Milk from a mare. It's a very unique taste. They have a name for it, which is not very appealing, but it's really good. I avoided drinking it for a long time, but finally I had to try some. It was very good. Lots of food around. I mean, it looks like anything you would see here. Here are the pine nuts. It takes a minute for it to pop in. You can see a little bag of those. That's about, it's not quite $10, that little bag. So they're expensive, but they're really good. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is there any oversight of their food, like we're supposed
I
to?
don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. I would assume there is, but I would also assume it's probably not as rigorous as here, but I don't know that. There's a butcher here. This doesn't look too appetizing. What is that, a liver there? I don't know what it is. She looks pretty tough too. A lot of meat. They eat a lot of meat in Siberia, a lot of protein. There aren't many vegetarians living here, I don't think. They need protein, especially in the winters. Fruit, fish, a lot of fish. They eat a lot of fish. Dried fish, see a lot of dried fish. Let's let this snap into picture. They love cut flowers. Everywhere you go, on the street, everywhere, you see lots of markets with cut flowers.
Where do they grow them?
I have no idea.
It's so cold.
I don't know, but boy, they're all over the place, I'll tell you that. I can't imagine they would be importing a lot of this stuff, but maybe they do, I don't know. It's a good.
Did you see any greenhouses?
I didn't, but I'll look into it. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the growing season for
It's
flowers
short.
and vegetables?
It's shorter. You're reminding me of something. When I got to Krasnoyarsk, well, I say it's shorter. It's probably similar to like Alaska, because when I got to Krasnoyarsk, the sun came up at 5, and it went down at 11 at night. It was a long day, but my hunch is that there's going to be a long dark period. I would probably liken it to Alaska for a place to grow things. That would be my guess.
So they get a lot of sunlight in a
Short period of time. When I stayed in Tinda, by Tinda, this lady there, who we'll meet at some point, grew all her own stuff. And she was a fabulous cook, and almost anything you could think of, she had some down in her cold cellar, canned, And so she had these hot peppers. So I took 2 home with me, and I took the seeds out of them, and I was growing these peppers at home. And I have a lot of hot peppers if you're interested. But
You can take peppers into our country?
no. I actually learned something this way. something you need to know about me is I'm a rule breaker. If there's a rule out there, particularly if it doesn't make sense to me, you know. I haven't quite gotten to going through red lights yet, but, you know, but it's tempting at night. But anyway, it's interesting because I planted these seeds, and I had a hell of a time with these seeds, that the pepper plants were getting like a mildew on their leaves, and they weren't maturing. I finally put them in pots, and that's the way they grow them in Russia. They call them Siberian house peppers, and they grow them in pots. What I learned is that the seeds actually carry a disease. I would never have thought of that. There's a way you can treat the seeds. It's pretty easy. You have to just heat them in hot water. But I thought, you know, how harmful can it be to bring in a couple peppers? But actually, the seeds are the problem, and not so much the peppers. And so I now have many good seeds, and next year I'll have many more peppers. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with all of them, but the idea that I'm eating peppers that came from Siberia is kind of interesting. This is Irkutsk, just walking around. Irkutsk is referred to as the Paris of Siberia. And it's not so much because of its looks, it's because the Decembrists who went there were royalty. And they brought with them a lot of the attachments, you know, teaching foreign languages, music, culture. And so they brought with them a lifestyle and a culture of a European, of an aristocratic European. So that has to this day influenced this city. And so that's where it gets the name from, the Paris of Siberia.
One more thing. One of the wives wrote her memoir.
Yes.
And there's an excellent book out called Princess of Siberia.
I'm good, yeah.
And it talks about when she lived near the Ukraine area and then ended up with her
Right.
husband in there. And she was the one that was one of the main ones that developed it so the way it
Yes.
is today.
Yeah, her name is,
Maria.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. If I have time today, I'm going to talk about that.
Oh, good.
Because their house is in the city, and it's a museum, and you can go visit it. This is a fountain, same scene. It's a lady relaxing. This is a street, main street downtown. Very European, very nice. A lot of cafes. I walked around here a lot. This was a church I was walking by, and I saw these kids in an art class, so I just went over and watched them for a while, you know, drawing their pictures. And this is kind of interesting. This is something you see in a lot of the cities. It's a board with pictures, and this goes on for a long ways. And these are all people who died in the war, and they're memorialized. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact of the war on Russia. It's staggering, unbelievable, really. Here's our friend Lenin. He doesn't seem to have anything to say here. It's just a picture of him. He's all over the place. I don't know what this is. They look angry. I was going to try to translate it, but there's a lot of translating there, so I didn't bother with it. If Lawrence was here, he could read it. Lawrence could read Russian, but he isn't here today. This, again, is just something you run into, and it's mentioned in the book. These old houses, these old wooden houses, blocks of them. And you walk along there like it's like art. You know, it's just, they're just gorgeous. And there's a subway, which I thought was interesting. Yeah, that's in English, right? Yeah, subways.
Surprised that they are not burned, being from wood.
Well, they are, and many of them have been destroyed. I wonder where they get their meat, if they slice it there, or if it's... Remember there was a big thing, the subway? There's a ATM down there. I took a side trip up along Lake Baikal. People come to Irkutsk to go to Lake Baikal. This is called, oh my God, no, omul. It's a fish that's only in this lake. And it's a very important fish as far as their economy is concerned and what they eat. This is a freshwater seal. It's the only freshwater seal in the world that lives in this lake. This lake, Baikal, is 50 million years oldest lake in the world, on the planet. It's the deepest, holds 20% of the fresh water in the world. It's just an ecological marvel. Has its own ecosystem. As we're driving along, somebody asked about churches. Most of the rural churches are wooden. This is an old wooden church. A lot of these, again, have burned down. They're still building new houses, and they're building wood houses. And this is very traditional construction for new houses in this part of Russia. They build out of logs, still. A lot of joinery. And a lot of problems with wood houses. This was a market nearby. It was chilly that day. Fish, there's fish all over the place here. Look at these little fish. It took me a minute to figure out what am I looking at here, and they're tiny little fish, kind of on a skewer with a...
Did you try some?
No. I ate fish, but not those fish. I ate omul. Omul is wonderful. That's the little seal they were selling. These, I should have gotten one of those for my grandkids, but I didn't. Other artifacts like this they were selling. And then there's the fish again. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about, again, get back to the railroad. What happened with the railroad is they were able to get over the bridges, over the rivers, the big rivers, with bridges. It took them some work, but they were able to get across the rivers. They came to Lake Baikal. Lake Baikal is 400 miles long. Is that right? I think that's right. And maybe 300 miles long and 40 miles wide, something like that. It's big. And there's no way you can build a bridge across it. There's no way you can tunnel under it. So they were presented with a dilemma. Well, what were they going to do? Because they built the railroad up to here by 1898, and they had the railroad completed to the other side over here about the same time. So we're just prior to 1900, and what are they going to do? Well, somebody came up with the idea of ferrying the train across the lake. So they built a ferry. They had it built in England. It was called the Baikal. There's a picture of it. And they'd roll the train in there, and they could carry the passengers as well. This is in the winter. Of course, in the winter, it froze over. So they needed to have some ice-breaking capability with this boat, which they did, up to a point. At some point, they needed additional, so they built this additional ship called the Angara, which is now, the Baikal is long gone. This ship is still around. This was a sister ship, much smaller, but they just carried people on this. They didn't carry railroad cars on this. It was called the Angara. That's the name of the river that that enters. And there's some pictures of the Angara. And you can walk through this ship, tour it. It's very interesting. Around 1900, they had this jerry-rig system going. So that's the first time you could really go from Moscow to Vladivostok. The Tsar had a deal with Fabergé where every year they would make an egg for him. And Fabergé turns out to be interesting. Fabergé, I think of them as French. In fact, they are. They may be in Paris now, but at this time they weren't. They were in St. Petersburg. They came from France, They went to St. Petersburg, and they really learned their trade in St. Petersburg, taking care of all the Tsar's jewels and everything, and all repairing them and working on them. And they came up with this whole idea of the porcelain, all this stuff that became their trademark. And they became actually, for the Tsar, kind of a go-to person. So the Tsar, they worked out an arrangement where they would make an egg for the Tsar every year. And these eggs are on display in the Kremlin. If you take a tour, you can see some of them. In 1900, in honor of the Trans-Siberian Railroad, this was the egg they made. And I'll jump ahead and then come back. And if you look, the train, there I don't know how many cars, but they're stacked inside the egg. And then when you take them out, you assemble them. There's a key there. You can wind that thing up. It actually runs. It's made out of gold. And you can see this if you go to the... And what happened is when the Bolsheviks came along in 1917, they got out of Russia and went back to France, which is where they are now. But this is where they developed a lot of their technology. Okay, so after about a year, they had so much trouble with this ferry arrangement that they said, we've got to come up with another approach here. Well, the most obvious thing to do, which is what they ended up doing eventually, is to go from Irkutsk right down here, but there were mountains here. There are mountains here. And they didn't really want to get involved making tunnels. They didn't know much about it. They avoided tunnels. So what they came up with was the idea, and you can see the dotted line. It's now underwater, a lot of it, because they built a dam on the Angara. The dotted line shows they ran the railroad down to Baikal, and then they ran a railroad along the shore here. This was a very tricky thing to build, but it was doable. So they started that around 1900, and by 1904 they had it done. Once that was done, they then had a direct rail link. The ferry was history. That wasn't working very well anyway, with problems with weather and ice and everything. So you can take a trip now. This is gone because this is underwater, most of it, but this still stayed. And in fact, this route down here and here and here opened up in 1904, and it stayed in use till 1950s. So that was the way you went on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. And then after the 1950s, they finally put the current route through, got some tunnels going and everything, and it joins down here. Well, all these towns along here were isolated then. So for a while, they ran the train back and forth, and that didn't pan out. So now they run a tourist train up there. It's a 10-hour day. It's a long day. But I thought, what the heck, you know, I'm going to do this. This was pouring down rain that day. Again, in the rail yard, I always looked around to see what's going on here. You know, there's some, these could be, I don't know if this is oil or not along here, but there's the train, there's a lot of empty coal cars. Not really too much going on here right now in terms of what they're hauling. But this was the day. It was not a very good day. This is what the lake looks like on a good day. It's beautiful. This is the train going up. It's a single track now. It was double track. After about 10 years, they went from a single to a double track. Around 1914, they've taken out the second track. I don't even know where it went, to be honest with you, when I look at this. But you can see how steep this is along here and how precarious it is. The train comes up to a town. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. This is the town. And we parked along here and we all got off. And I thought this was interesting. I saw this church over here, so I took a picture of the church. It's a tiny little church, kind of a And then they let us off, and now here you can see there were 2 tracks because there's 2 bridges. And we walked down to, you could walk in the tunnels. A lot of kids, a lot of people. When I was riding up on the train, I was all by myself. And this young woman came back and sat down next to me and said, in pretty good English, "Why are you alone?" And I said, I explained as best as I could. She spoke English pretty well. Somebody mentioned this the other day. I did these trips totally by myself. And I wanted to do them by myself. And I'm blessed with a wife who is more than willing to just say, "Go," you know. And I wouldn't want the responsibility of somebody else on these trips. As you could see already, we got into some situations where if I had to worry about not only myself but somebody else, it would be hair-raising for probably both of us. Definitely probably not a good idea with your wife, you know, but or anybody you're close to. So anyway, this woman sat and talked to me, and she was with a child and another couple, and I assumed she was the mother. I got off here, and there's a picture coming, that's what I wanted to explain. Oh, here you go. This says, the rail joint of the Great Siberian Railroad was commissioned here on 18 September 2004. So this tunnel was the official link point that actually established the thing all the way through. This talks about a rather innovative system of routing a river, or a small river underneath the tracks. And this is the couple. The gal on the right, her name was Katerina, call me Kate. And that was her sister, Olga, and their son, I wrote it down, Andre. He was 10 years old. They were very friendly to me. And we got off, and they kind of went their way a little bit, I went mine. But this was, I thought her husband. It turns out it's her brother-in-law. And I thought that was her child. It's not her child. She was a law student, last year law student at the University in Irkutsk. The town folk were obviously prepared for us. They were selling food. They told me, she told me, Kate told me, you know, get some of this, get some of that. And they were grilling meat. I look happier there. This was the village. Now, this is a village, people live here. I mean, take note of these 2 ladies sitting outside their house there. I walked down, and there was, down in through town, there was a lady that was selling borscht, homemade borscht. And she obviously, people knew about it, because a lot of people had gone down there, and she was already sold out by the time I got down there. This was her kitchen, just some pictures I took walking around. They grow, again, all their own herbs and everything. There's a big garden back here. Takes a minute for when I'm going through these. This is just, there's a house back there. There's, I don't know what all here. I mean, people live here. This is just a shed, wood for heating, laundry, chickens. And obviously a baby here, or a young child somewhere. It looks like, used to look around when I was growing up as a young boy, and maybe not in those conditions, but you know, laundry hanging out. I'm sure there's no electric dryers around here. Plumbing, as it is, a little more convenient. There's the 2 ladies again. They hadn't moved a muscle. I went over, and they just sat there. They didn't say anything. I could have taken pictures of them all day. Finally, a dog came over. They didn't smile. They didn't do anything. They might not have even been real. I don't know.
How do they preserve their vegetables? How do they preserve their vegetables and fruits in the winter?
They can them.
Grow anything?
Yeah,
And everything?
yeah, a lot of canning. Yeah. When I was staying in Canada, this woman produced all this amazing food, and it came out of a cold cellar that she had, and it was canned. I said I like mushrooms one night, and she went down, you know, you lift the floor up in the kitchen, go downstairs, and you got to realize some of this is on permafrost. I mean, it's cold. And so she came up with this jar of mushrooms that she had canned. You couldn't get anything like this in a restaurant. I mean, it was so good. It's amazing, really. This was one of the steam engines that plied the tracks here. I don't see Paul here today. He was, you know him, or?
Yeah, I do.
You're with him? Yeah, it's too bad. I actually put a couple bridges in for him because you'll have to tell him. Paul would know what this is, you know, exactly. This was a place where they brought water up for the boilers, it's defunct, obviously. We got up to Baikal. We took a ferry boat across the Angara River. This is the Cape. This is her family. Great looking family. It's interesting. I was with these people for the better part of the day, actually, since she befriended me on the train. And, you know, it's interesting. I was actually kind of sad, you know, when they left. I mean, I felt like I had a bunch of friends, and they were taking the bus back to Irkutsk. I had a driver because I had to get back for a train, so I couldn't take a chance on not being back there in time. And I had this driver who was driving over here is amazing. You know, I mean, it's all you do is keep your eyes ahead. You don't worry about anything that's behind you. They drive on the shoulder regularly. We'd be going along at some insane speed, and then all of a sudden, slow down. There was a speed trap somewhere. They knew where they all were. And we'd crawl along for a couple miles and then back up again. Never saw an accident. The Princess of Siberia. Yeah. This is what you were talking about. This is her. I'm worried about time. I would like to come back to this next week because I come back to Irkutsk next week, and I want to go on to Ulanudi because I want to finish something there. But we'll come back to this. Where's Ulanudi? It's down farther. How do I get down farther? Let me get my glasses. There we go. Okay, this is Ulanudi. I'm sorry?
Before you leave Lake Baikal, did you see, there's been a lot of articles about pollution in Lake Baikal. Are they cleaning it up, or what?
I don't know.
National Geographic is
Up on this?
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that that's the case, but I don't know. What did National Geographic have to say? Anything? It's a problem?
It is a serious problem.
Right.
And it's harmful to the wildlife and the seals.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Somebody's got a phone going somewhere. Any questions?
There was a seal at the bottom of the lake there, the paper mill. And they wanted to close, and they closed it for a while, and then they opened it again, but now it's closed, and they're trying to clean it up.
Okay, yeah. Okay. It may be that it's not unlike what was going on in our country. For years, we polluted things without, you know, realizing or caring or whatever, you know, and we're gradually cleaning up some of these places. I don't know, I'll look into it a little bit maybe before next class, sorry?
You planning on questions that people have in cards?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to check with some people.
Yeah. I have about 13 minutes left,
Okay.
so. I want to go through this next part. Here's a train. All the train stations have an engine. This is, Woolnooti was a very important place. They have a big museum here. They build trains here. When they got the, when they restored really, or built back up after the, in the 20s, when Stalin got his 5-year plan going, they built a lot of equipment in Woolnooti. So, we're now in Woolnooti. We were on the other side, pretty much where the Angara River comes in. We were right around in here. This, Woolnooti is the capital of a part of Russia called Buryatia. The Buryats are a large ethnic group, about 500,000 of them. They've been here forever. They came out of Mongolia. They may have even preceded the Mongolians. They're a very old group of people. And a lot of people were sent here. We're going to see that there's also a Buddhist group here. We'll see them next week. But what I want to talk about today is a group called the, oh, this is the river in the area. I can't think of the name of it, Senegi or something like that. You can see another huge river. Are the Old Believers. This village here, Tarbagade, is where we went. The Old Believers, this goes back to the 16th century, mid-16th century. The Russian Orthodox Church the Greeks came up into Russia, brought their Orthodox religion with them. And over time, the Russians sort of fashioned it into their own, and they deviated away from, in some small ways, the Greek Orthodox Church. There was a patriarch by the name of Nikon who came along, and it's not clear why or what the pressures were, but he decided it was time to align the Russian Orthodox Church with the Greek Orthodox Church. So he went pretty much on his own and changed a whole bunch of things and instituted this without really consulting anybody. And there was a huge pushback, so much so that there was a schism. And the Old Believers were the people who held on to the old tradition. They were sent initially to Poland and Belarus. Eventually Russia absorbed those areas, so then they sent them finally 250 years ago way over here to Buryatia. The Buryats, the people who live here, are out of the Mongolian tradition, so they herd animals. The Old Believers are farmers, so they managed to work out something where they could coexist there. They're there today. When the Bolsheviks took over, there were, I saw a number, 80, I think, churches, 40,000 old believers in this area that we see here. By the time they were done, or today it's 10,000, and there's 15 churches. So there's not much left. It almost totally vanished. But this particular town is one of the places where they live. And again, look at the construction of the homes. It's what we saw earlier when we were on the other side of Lake Baikal. They're all beautifully painted. The streets are dirt, no paved roads. Beautiful gardens.
They have electricity?
Yes. This is a local church. This was the first church that was kind of put back in commission in this area. We're going to meet the pastor in a minute. This was like I guess you'd call an ethnographic. This person just collected stuff, you know, all kinds of stuff. I'm sorry?
Were you an antique shop?
No, in my old antiquing days, I would have gone nuts in here, but now I just went around and the icons. It's just a lot of very interesting memorabilia, stuff from the area. This is the son and his wife of the pastor. I want to come back to this. I might not have time to talk about it today because I want to tie it into the whole Putin thing with religion. This is his dad, the pastor. This is the church. I'll come back and talk about them. Part of my visit here involved going to the home of a woman, a widow, who had prepared a meal for me. This is her. Her name was Dulsa. This is a Polish tradition too. They meet you at the door with salt and bread. This was our car driver. He was out firing up the samovar. So I just took a few pictures around when we were waiting for our dinner or our lunch. A lot of very complicated needlework done by these people. I think that might have been her at a younger time. She was married when she was 16 in an arranged marriage, which is typical. I have some more things to tell you about this. I'm not going to have time today to go into it, but you can get an idea. This was my guide. Her name is Elena. Elena was, gotta watch time. Elena was an interesting young lady. She had been in the United States, in Pennsylvania, at Indiana University on the sort of a Fulbright scholarship in reverse. Very smart, very good English. I would say frustrated. She was pushing 30, very ambitious, and I think this is a problem for young people in Russia. She was still living at home. She couldn't afford to be on her own. She didn't have a car because she couldn't find employment really that was would allow her to do these things. And I've tried repeatedly to get hold of her because I'm curious. Now this is 7 years ago now, to see whatever became of her. She'd be in her mid-30s now, maybe. I don't know. Very, as you can tell, very pleasant. She was a little bit of a. She was a little. It's another story. This is. She had bread for us. It's wonderful. Everything. She grows all this stuff. Pickles. She was making something here. I don't know what, looks like tea or something. Potatoes. This up on the top here is just fat. It's like the bacon fat almost, but there's no meat at all with it. And it's rather tough. But they eat. She's the one that told me, you gotta eat protein here in the winter. And fat. You're not gonna survive here. She's the one that told me there's no vegetarians living here. And you could tell from her, and most everybody there was, you didn't see a lot of skinny girls around, let's put it that way.
What month was this?
Late June. Cheese, a dessert, fabulous cook, and vodka. She distilled her own vodka. She started showing me different kinds of clothing, beadwork, and then at one point she said to me, would you like to see what a wedding situation looks like, a ceremony looks like? And I said, sure. So she got herself dressed up, and then she started dressing me up. And then we sat down, and this was sort of a ceremony here. And she had some, I don't know, I guess she was treating me to something here. And this is part of the ceremony. This would have been her dad. And you get paddled just to make sure that you each understand there's no fooling around here, this is real, and then I get to paddle her to remind her who's boss here.
They still do it?
What?
Do they still do it?
Yeah, It's the wedding. The wedding goes on for 3 days. The first day is the ceremony. The second day, they physically move the bride into the home of the groom, which is where the couple lives at first. And then the third day, they spend just traveling around visiting all the friends they can possibly visit.
But you were only there for one day.
I was only there for 1 day. I may have told someone this is where I found out I had to stay overnight, though. But that's not true. That was the end of that. So I wanted to show you that today. It's 12:18. We're back in Ulanudi, and here's our friend Stalin again, or Lenin again. Only this is really something special. This is the biggest image or monument to Lenin anywhere in Russia. And there's no words or anything to go with it. So we'll finish up in Ulanudi next week and then finish our journey to the end of Vladivostok. We will go back and do the Decemberists. What I would like you to do, if you brought your cards back from last time, please keep them. And what I want you to do before you leave today, because I'd like to get these, because I'd like to look at them before my next class. Just before you go, just take 1 minute and write down something I learned today that surprised me and that I found enjoyed, and a question. And then you can hand them my way on the way out. And I'll see you next week. And remember, these are available as loaners. And this book is available if anybody wants to take it and read it. If somebody wants to do that, I would be interested in your impressions of it, if you do take a look at it. Okay? So I'll see you next week. I think you're going to find this keeps getting more and more interesting, which is good. There's not much drama anymore like we had with Tsar last week. That was a kind of a tough session.
Think about serving liquid.
120?
Yes, when you pour it.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to check it out.
Okay, and it's just an open conference.
Okay,
You can't have people take the liquid out.
I understand. I want to bring some cookies in and bring this drink in. And we could sort of congregate there?
Yeah, and like that in class or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. I didn't recognize you at first.
I can't imagine. I don't look anything like I looked 2 weeks ago.
You got everything's back to normal a little bit? Or?
Yes, I hope so. Yeah.
Good.
I'm in good shape. I'm very, very lucky. I just broke a little bit easier.
Oh, wow.
No surgery.
What happened here? Same thing?
Yeah, I tripped.
I know, but what's going on here though? Is it broke?
It's just, it's just a little bit bone.
But no break here.
No, it's
Good.
just a stabilizer.
You can